Mindset Game Podcast, and I'm your host, James Roberts. Before we get started with this week's show, first off, let me take this opportunity to welcome back the regular listeners. And if this is your first time listening to the show, I hope you enjoy this episode and decide to subscribe to the show. And today's guest, I've got Trevor Bunch. He's a congenital double amputee. The medical term for it is tibial dysplasia, and he's a business owner of Fit Bunch. Thanks again, Trevor, for coming on.
No problem.
So we talked a little bit off air about your background. Obviously, you were a former member of the U.S. Paralympic powerlifting team, and you were the national record holder for your weight class.
I currently hold the national powerlifting record for my weight class, yeah. And
then at your best, we were saying off air that you were ranked as much as fourth in the world. Is that correct?
For a little bit, yes, I was actually as high as fourth in the world.
And then with powerlifting, did you get to travel a lot around the world?
Mm-hmm.
Can you name some of the places?
In 2014, I went to Dubai, and in 2015, we went to Mexico City. The national competitions are unfortunately, either or, held in Oklahoma City. So kind of not necessarily remote, but not necessarily a glamorous destination either.
And then we talked a little bit about off air how you got into personal training, and you were saying you wrestled a little bit in high school. What kind of got you into wrestling in the first place?
Looking back through high school and everything, even prior to high school, I remember my dad, he'd have night school. He was going to night school to be a paralegal and then a lawyer. And before he left for, night school each night during the week, he and I would always just like wrestle around in the living room. And that'd be kind of our little time that we got to spend together after I got home from school and before he left for the night. So we would always do that. And growing up, I was kind of into professional wrestling as well. And I think what really got me into actually coming out to wrestle was just one of my friends, a guy who had been giving me rides home from school my first couple of years of high school, was like, well, wrestling practice is coming up, so I'm not going to be able to take it home unless that's something you want to do. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll come down and give it a try. It actually turned out pretty well for me, so I'm pretty I look back and I think that my days of high school and early college wrestling definitely had a lot to do with the way I approach life, and it just had a huge impact on the way that I am today, So it's great.
And as a double amputee, there's a few videos out there of that I've seen to do with wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And in your opinion, is there a slight advantage for anybody who has an impairment of that kind with a center of gravity?
I look at it kind of both ways. I can see why people would think that, and I even but even as an advantage or a disadvantage, the attitude that I was kind of brought up with and had instilled in me is, regardless of the playing field, you need to be able to accommodate to that. So, for people there were people who would say that for me, it was an advantage to have a lower center of gravity. And, I wrestled at 112 pounds. So obviously being 112 pounds of upper body, with very minimal lower body, there's a bit of a strength advantage there, as well as the low center of gravity. But, I just got to say, then why aren't my opponents training to get any better? you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's been, the playing field to me is always level, and you can look at it as an obstacle or as an opportunity, because I definitely, when I was wrestling, had, aspects of the way that I wrestled that could easily be capitalized upon, by my opponents. And at the same time, if my opponents weren't good at defending themselves, if I were to, take a shot in on them and, take their legs out, if they weren't good at being able to defend that, then they, before they wrestled me, they better work on it.
Mm-hmm. And then what was kind of the factor that made you switch from wrestling to go into powerlifting?
I was in Oklahoma City for an event called the Endeavor Games, and I had been. It was the first time that I had gone, so we had to be classified to participate in the different sports. They had to get our classification level based off of amputations, and figure out how to class us. So I went down to be classified for track, which was the main reason that I had pursued the Endeavor Games, and I found out that they had powerlifting. So I, kind of winged it while I was there. I was just like, okay, well, that seems like something that I could do. I'd been in the weight room already. I'd been practicing as a personal trainer for, a couple of years at that point, and I just kind of got after it, and I said, "Oh, okay," and ended up taking a gold medal in powerlifting there at the Endeavor Games. And afterwards, had a chat with the coaches, and they're like, "Well, if you want to do this, this is what you got to do," and kind of gave me the steps from there.
Okay. And we talked about it a little bit. How did you get into personal training initially?
It's kind of funny, just ended up being a conversation with a friend while were on our way to the city or a night out town. He had just gotten his personal training certificate and had told, it was just like, hey man, you're spending, a good amount of time in the gym lately. Why don't you, get paid for the time that you're there? And oh, okay. And within a couple of weeks after that, I had gotten everything in order to start working on my certifications for training. And within about 2-3 months of that, I was certified, and had the luck to run into my current employer, and while I was actually at my other job, and got in on an interview with them, and it was just that easy.
Okay. And when you were competing for the US Paralympic powerlifting team, did you kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Cross um, kind of use both fields that you were in to help each other. So, say things you learned from personal training, put it into powerlifting, and vice versa.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I've always, kind of been looking at how the different fields can connect. So coming in with knowledge of how to gain strength and how to work on different aspects of stability and dealing with, minor injuries and muscular imbalance and stuff like that was really very helpful for me as far as getting my powerlifting going in the right direction.
Okay.
You
And then
know,
for people, something we haven't touched upon, for people listening, what is the difference between obviously Paralympic powerlifting and able-bodied powerlifting? Because there might be a misconception people have.
yeah. So regular uh, powerlifting is the squat, bench, and deadlift. All three lifts combined give you your total for that meet or that competition. And then with Paralympic powerlifting, it is very bench press specific. So you are on a bench, but it's a little bit different than your normal able-bodied bench. The bench is a little bit wider towards the bottom, so your feet are outstretched in front of you. as though you're on like a stretcher of sorts. And the criteria for a good lift or a missed lift is a heck of a lot stricter than it is for able-bodied powerlifting.
Okay. It's very, it's definitely watching the Paralympics. You're thinking, especially in my opinion, it's well, how's that a good lift and that's a bad lift, and it's like a fine line between either is like very minute, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, I've got to agree, and that's a huge aspect of it. Is being able to not only lift the weight, but lift the weight within the criteria that they want you to. They say the bar has to be held completely motionless on your chest, and there's no necessarily given duration for that. And then you could be practicing it incorrectly the whole time. You could send your coach a video and they could say, well, it looked like it would be good to me, but in competition that might not be. So it's a little bit objective in those aspects. They do what they got to do to make it as fair as possible. But yeah, at the end of the day, it is kind of up to the judges and how they're feeling that day.
Hmm. Well, it's one of those sports that it's a judgment call at the end of the day, isn't it?
It's huge, and I've had meets where I've gone and done my lift, and then my coach is off to the side clapping like, heck yeah, great job, you did it, and then I look over and there's two red lights. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess I didn't, do better next time, fix it, whatever it is, so.
And then for obviously the people that may have not watched Paralympic powerlifting, can you explain where the judges are situated in terms of the lighting system?
Yeah. So there's three judges. One is at the head, kind of above the bench, and then the other two are out to the sides towards the end of the bench, right about the feet. So the head judge is looking for very specific aspects of the maybe the pause or holding it completely still on the chest, and then the two side judges are looking for different aspects of, maybe how controlled or uncontrolled your descent was, or looking to make sure that your elbows lock out at the same time. So they're all kind of looking for slightly different aspects of the bench press.
Okay, so it's well, quite a complicated system a
It
little bit.
can be, yeah. And then yeah, it's very similar to able-bodied lifting in that, you have to get more white lights than red lights. Red lights bad, white lights are good.
And then within regards to this would probably be one of my personal question of mine.
hmm
Uh, would there be a difference within scoring between the lighting systems? So say somebody got two white lights as opposed to somebody getting three, but it was on the same weight. Would that have a bearing on the overall classification?
Um, as far as because it comes down to body weight too. There are coefficients that they have in a gigantic, crazy, unexplainable equation that I can't even get into that based off of your body weight. So theoretically, somebody could be lighter and lift slightly less, but based on that equation, as a percentage of body weight, it can end up being more. So it's a little bit confusing in that sense, but I've been to meets where that has been the deciding factor. So it's not like two white lights versus three. It's more I could come in on the low end of the weight class and theoretically beat somebody who lifted a little bit more than me just because it's a greater percentage of my body weight.
But that's probably the equalizer between for the to be able
Oh,
to
it's huge.
get
Yeah,
people in the sport is using that
yeah,
system.
yeah,
But then
definitely.
if we kind of flip that to a say strength component, you
hmm
want to be what's the word I'm looking for? Strength to weight ratio. You want to have less body but less body mass I
Yes.
suppose, what you're shifting, and obviously that will be a determinant of how strong you are.
Yes, sir. Exactly. It's not always just about, lifting the most weight necessarily as you being able to lift a bigger percentage, so to speak, of your body weight, or as that equation puts it.
Hmm. And then something we'll probably come back a little bit, a touch,
Hmm.
and come touch on your disability as such. With in terms of training, how have you adapted it to suit you? Because obviously, with having a disability, and myself included, we have to change exercises a little bit. What does type of things you have had to do over the years to maximize your training?
It's really interesting that you ask that. It's all about just being able to experiment and see what you can get away with, so to speak. In terms of, obviously, we have got our upper bodies being, lower limb amputees. We gotta kind of focus on and develop our strong points, but we also need to be able to work on uh, core strength, as well as training the lower body, just for optimal function. So there's definitely, some, and being a trainer, has its upside in that I'm able to look at things through that lens of, okay, well, what muscle groups are working right now, and how can I get these other ones that maybe aren't as fired up to come into play. So it's really interesting to be able to look at things through that standpoint. And how I've been able to kind of hack around that in my own training is just through a lot of experimentation, through a lot of self experimentation. I work with a couple of amputee clients right now, and with them, it's like the first handful of training sessions that I go through with them. It's just about finding their capabilities and finding the right way. They're finding their way, rather, not the right way, so to speak, but their way of doing things. You
Okay.
know. So, and I tell people that all the time. It's not necessarily about finding the right way to do it. It's about finding your right way to do it.
That's probably the right way of going about it. Obviously, with any disability, you've had to find a way of adapting to life anyway. So why
Hmm.
not do the same with training?
Yeah, exactly. And it's. I think it's interesting because it's kind of one hand washes the other in that aspect, because I'm able to, I look at things through the how can I get this done, and how can I facilitate this movement for myself or this other person with another disability, and how do the two differ? How is my squat or hip hinge going to differ from that of somebody who's missing one leg below the knee? And what types of compensations am I looking out for? So, and being able to, approach life in that regard too, and like, how am I going to find a way to get up these stairs? Well, there's no handicap ramp, so I can't go around, so I need to walk up them. Okay, all right. How am I going to do that?
Hmm. And then one question I've kind of written down since we've been on air is what tips would you give anybody starting out in fitness, and then probably more specifically any amputees?
Yeah. So for people who are just starting out in fitness, it is as simple as just getting consciously moving, and finding ways to measure and to progress yourself on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And I'm not talking just about focusing on your scale weight, so to speak, but taking a look at, I have people who will struggle to get out there and walk, even a quarter mile. Or I'll have amputee clients who come to me and they can barely walk 10 feet unsupported. And I'm like, okay, well, next week we walk 15 feet, and finding ways to progress yourself in those aspects, without being, set goals for yourself and don't be too hard on yourself for maybe falling a little bit short, but evaluating what you did well and what you can do better, and being able to take everything kind of as a learning experience. And one thing that I am huge on is just being able to respect the process regardless. Respecting the process of losing weight and dieting, or getting your nutrition in line, respecting the process of getting to the gym, frequently on day, and pushing yourself on days when you don't want to, and not looking for the next instantaneous overnight solution, and not looking for the big short-term fad fix on things. And being able to know that there's going to be some great days and there's going to be some awful days, but being able to get in there and do your work on the days that, you don't want to is absolutely huge,
That's something I definitely agree with. And then, obviously, I'll come to another question. It's something I've been asked as a personal trainer as well in the past, with regards to people with amputations.
Mm-hmm.
I've been asked, obviously, with regards to undeveloped glutes, some of them have had problems with glute activation for their, say, for example, a single amputee with glute activation on the impaired side. What are some tips that you would recommend for that problem?
My favorite move of all time is the hip bridge, or hip thruster. Lying either on the ground or on with your shoulders supported on a bench, and pushing the hips towards the sky. There's a lot of different ways to facilitate that, with one leg, with no legs, and just about getting a way to leverage yourself and get those muscles to start firing. It's being able to consciously call them into play, and building the mind and muscle, the neuromuscular connection between your brain and that specific part of your body. That is my all-time favorite thing for amputees, and I think it's hugely underrated. You don't even normally see it too often in like physical therapy settings. Even it's something that they kind of touch on, but as a trainer, especially of amputees, I'm always gonna try and find a way to get them to be able to do that, because from a strict activation standpoint, and having limited movements otherwise, obviously if everybody can squat, we're going to get them to squat. But if you're a single above the knee amputee, then, what the heck are we going to do? Oh, well, you might be able to squat, but you're not going to be able to activate on that side as much. So, that, as well as any hip hinge, is going to be huge too. So maybe a single leg deadlift or single leg RDL, some variation of that is going to be big too.
And it's something we've not touched upon. Obviously, the importance of glute activation, especially for the amputees, is obviously the downside of not being having strong glutes is obviously will have a knock-on effect on your muscle chain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely. Well, and I mean, all the generally sedentary lifestyle that becomes the amputee, whether it's from time spent in a wheelchair, or not being able to get out and use prosthetics, or just not having the right team behind you with the knowledge to get you moving properly just leads to the sedentary lifestyle. And then next thing you know, well, and you know this, you get the office worker syndrome. You get the weak glutes, the no hamstring, very 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 tight hip flexors, overactive low back, and no core.
Yep.
So I approach. I try not to push too far in that direction with any client, but that is a huge problem among the vast majority of amputees and the general populace too.
And then the other question I generally get asked, obviously, it's generally a problem with the general population anyway, is obviously the upper abs and the mid abs are generally not a problem with people. It's
Mm-hmm.
generally the lower abdominals. What are some exercise tips you would give to help strengthen that? Because obviously with an amputee, uh, say for example reverse crunch, obviously I don't know if it's the same with you. I have a problem, obviously, because due to the nature of the disability being congenital.
Mm-hmm.
My lower back is possibly not as strong as it could be, and then
Mm-hmm.
obviously you don't want to use momentum in your legs to generate that crunch. For in that
Yeah.
sense, how would you go about obviously activating that muscle?
That's a tough one because, and honestly, not one that I've really considered. But to me, a lot of the lower ab movements that you see are the ones that people gravitate towards because they can quote feel it, are like the hanging leg raises and the reverse crunches and that sort of thing. It's interesting because I tend to shy away from those because of the overactive hip flexor complex as it is. If I, I I don't know if I would really focus on training an amputee's lower abs as a specific muscle group necessarily, so much as I would have them focus on anti spinal extension movements like the dead bug variations. Though I think that to me would lend itself to more day to day functionality and day to day strength than just working the lower abs.
Okay, and then
That.
moving on a little bit from that,
Mhm.
would it probably be better? Would be well, we could probably make this more general to anybody to that's listening. Would it be more important to focus more on your nutrition when it comes to your abdominals than training, or would it be a case of both?
I think especially as you're starting out, it's all nutrition. I think from the hardcore personal trainer in me says, get your nutrition right, and then we'll talk about your abs. But I think that also once you start to get to those lower body fat percentages, you can definitely get a little bit more out of the not necessarily the functional abdominal movements as the decline crunches and the hanging leg raises and that sort of thing. From a training perspective, I try to gear my clients' ab movements almost half and half between the ones that they feel that might not be the most functional, but then I try to get the other half being the functional ones that they're kind of like, why am I doing this? I'm like, well, because you need to. This is the stuff that's actually going to help you in your day to day life. The anti rotation, the anti flexion or anti lateral flexion, anti extension types of exercises. But those aren't also the most thrilling ones to perform either. So
Definitely,
they
definitely not.
yeah, so there'll be times where I'll have people do, a set of, 25 or 30 crunches and then reverse crunches and, like maybe not side bend, side bridge hip raises. Those are well, side bridge hip raises are actually a good feel it and functional variety as well. But and then I'll have them do Palloff press and dead bug variations, and like, well, why are we doing these? They don't hurt, so they must not be working. No, well, they are. You just have to be able to focus and get those muscles to fire as they are supposed to in that situation.
Well, it's probably slow. It's probably a case more of you may not be feeling it, but then are you activating the muscle properly then?
Yeah. It's that's huge too. Is to and it's got kind of like a plank or a bridge position, because I know people who can hold a plank all day, but are they truly activating their abs? The rectus abdominis. Are they really calling that into play? No, probably not, because if you're really working to brace the abs and keep everything as tight as it should be. And a plank is not a 10-minute yoga hold. It's meant to be 20, 30 seconds, and then I find ways to start making it harder.
Yeah, well, it's definitely something. Well, I've looked on YouTube for what's his name, Jeff Cavalier. Obviously, he focuses a lot on body weight exercises on his training, and he said, obviously, well, we touched upon it a little bit with the plank. Obviously, if you can hold a plank, well, say for not 10 minutes, for example, that's a bit excessive, but say 3, 4, 5 minutes, obviously, well, that's too easy. You need to look at progressing it to, I don't know, say, for example, decline plank, and obviously that's going to have stress the muscle in a different way entirely than a normal plank would be.
I'll go to plank to push up, or low plank to high plank. I'll go plank leg raises, or reaching like just different limb raises, or try and make the plank a little bit more dynamic, like a body saw type of movement. Kind of rocking back and forth in a plank position. Those are kind of my go-tos for progressing it. And once you start to get into that and really being able to keep the form, keeping the hips square with the ground and not letting the low back sag, because that's another thing I could get on about that all day. People who progress exercises too soon. I see guys doing Bosu ball decline Bosu ball push-ups, so with their feet on a bench, and their hands are on a Bosu ball with the dome facing down, and their low back just looks like an accordion. And I'm like, you need to draw it back a little bit there, because otherwise you're gonna get hurt. You're not doing what you think you're doing.
Yes.
So.
Well, it's trying to not overcomplicate the exercise at the end of the day. At sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's the other end of the other side of the coin is how is at the end of the day. Yeah, it is supposed to be. It's a body weight exercise. It's supposed to be relatively simple, and you don't need to overcomplicate. You can get enough out of it as it is. That's why it's a functional starting movement. It's a plank is a foundational movement that everybody in some way, shape, or form needs to be able to perform.
Well, it's probably got a little bit of a misconception, bodyweight exercise, because obviously people think of it as, I wouldn't say lesser, to a lesser extent than, say, dumbbell exercises, machines, and benches, when really it's probably an equalizer between people, because obviously it's going to be difficult to you no matter what, because it's at the end of the day it's your body weight you're having to shift. So the exercise, well, you'd have to play around with it a little bit, obviously, in terms of reps for somebody who weighs a little bit less. Yeah,
it's about relative intensity at that point too. A push-up for somebody who, weighs 135 pounds might not be that big of a deal depending on how well conditioned or deconditioned they are. But, a push-up for somebody who's 225 pounds is considerably more,
Mm-hmm.
and people don't pay attention to the fact that you have to be that much more in shape to be able to, or that much more well conditioned to be able to perform those movements at that weight, or a squat, a pull up, any of those movements it can be really hard. Not only if you're overweight, but even if you're of a good body fat percentage and just heavy, you're still moving a lot of weight regardless.
Mm-hmm.
So people look at like body weight or calisthenics as kind of a wuss, a cop out, like, whatever, you can do body weight squats all day. No, if the intensity's there and you're doing it right, then you should be able to get your exertion and intensity up there pretty easily.
And then, yeah, I definitely agree with that. And then something we haven't touched upon, obviously for people that are starting out, and obviously weight is going to play a major factor with
Mm-hmm.
any body weight exercise,
Mm-hmm.
well, it's probably for you and me, it's probably, we look at adaptations for everybody anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Are people, I'll try to word this correctly, are people best to regress an exercise if they're not performing an exercise correctly, in your opinion?
I think that I think we kind of talked about this briefly off air. I think that in some aspects there's good form and then there's good enough for today form with some exercises. Like some individuals aren't meant to be able to squat to parallel or below parallel. And if I've got somebody who is, at that point, then yeah, I'm always going to be working to increase their range of motion. But if they're hitting, 2/3 of the depth or just north of parallel, then I'm gonna be satisfied with that. And if they're presenting some other muscular imbalances that you see, like the tight adductors, or they're leaning forward a good amount, then I'm gonna work to correct that as it is presenting itself right then, the best that I can, by getting them to focus on, say, driving their knee outward, if their knee's caving in, getting them to focus on that right then and seeing if that makes a difference for them, and kind of bleeding that aspect dry before I really give up on that exercise, so to speak. So, you know, is it worth regressing? Just depends to me on how how bad is it? Can I find a way that they can still safely perform, maybe a limited range of motion or with some assistance, rather than just throwing out the exercise entirely?
Oh, I wouldn't go that far to throw as
Yeah,
to throwing out the exercise. I would
no.
mean maybe like, oh, so for example, a chin up, obviously going from either a band assisted chin up or the oh god, what's the name of the machine? The
Assisted
the
dip
assisted weighted
chins.
one.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, no, I do that for people as it is anyway. So I don't think that would be a problem at all. Even for a squat, like there's obviously a difference between box squats and squatting to a box. I can have somebody who maybe doesn't have the range of motion with a barbell on their back to be able to get adequate range of motion on their squat. I'll have them do it to a box, if it's not too much more for them,
Okay.
just so that they know it's there and they can start to kind of gear their mental, that mind body connection towards like, okay, this is where I'm supposed to stop. And then over time, we take the box away, or we get them just to stop right at the box rather than sitting all the way on it. Um, there's everybody's going to perform exercises maybe just a little bit differently. There's no right way for one to perform one, I don't think.
Oh, it's probably the best way of looking at it is probably not focusing too much on, obviously, like you say, getting it to what people would term the perfect position for an exercise. It's going to your range of movement, because obviously there's loads of factors that all have a bearing on that. Say, like we discussed, obviously tightness in the muscle is going to have a bearing on how much flexibility you have. Obviously, if you're starting out, technique is going to have a massive
and
bearing.
if I can set those benchmarks and be able to move forward from there, and then I can even take some of the imbalances that I see in somebody's squat. We keep going back to that, but it is the biggest movement there is, and you'll see more muscular imbalances presented in the squat than anywhere else. But I'll go back to that and I'll say, oh, okay, well, you have tight adductors or weak glutes or whatever, and I'll be able to gear some of the other exercises that I do that session towards getting those guys fired up. And I'll say, okay, well, you can throw this into your routine as either its own independent movement or something that you should be doing to warm up. Lateral lunges I'm huge on because they work well to strengthen the inner thigh muscles, which is often weak and tight in people. In the vast majority of the population, anybody who has a seated desk job has weak and tight adductors. So I'll throw a lateral lunge their way, and I'll have them do them either in between the sets or as an extra movement in the workout. And then I'll say, you can be doing these to warm up, and you'll probably get better results with your squat.
So from that, I'd definitely say you're probably a definite advocate for, I won't say it's prehab, but obviously, obviously it would probably be getting the muscle ready for work. So pre-activation, as we discussed.
Yeah,
previously.
I think there's a lot to be said for. I think even being able to, for newer clients, it's a matter of being able to start thinking through that muscle is kind of the term that I use with people. So it's astounding, I'll say, like for a lat pull down, for the seated lat pull down, when I tell people, okay, so you can do this just by kind of flexing your arm and throwing your elbows down, you'll be able to move the weight. But now here, truly think through your shoulder blade and think about, pinching those muscles down and together, you get a lot more out of that. But yeah, I think that building that mind and body connection, either during the exercise while just telling somebody, okay, think about this on your inner thigh or think about this through your shoulder blade. I think that before and during an exercise, being able to know what muscles you're working and know where your weaknesses are and what needs to be kind of called into play is huge. And I do it too during my lifts. For bench press, I'll start to realize during a set, oh, my triceps are getting fatigued, or my chest, this bar isn't coming off my chest. So I'll be able to kind of move the elbows a little bit differently, or consciously, pump up my chest, real quick at the bottom of it just to be able to get the bar going, So I think there's a lot of different mental tricks that work well for people, that they don't realize. Your mind has a lot to do with it.
Well, that's one we can pinpoint to fitness, but that's probably something you could equate to if you're realistic and everybody be honest with themselves that are listening, it's probably something you could relate to anything in life.
Oh, heck yeah. I mean, really, if you're, I'm a big fan of visualizing and trying to know what's going to happen, before it happens, so to speak. And if I find that there are definitely events in my life, whether it's, just small stuff, day to day stuff, like this is how this conversation is going to go, or this is how I'm going to I'm going to take this route, with this person. And if they say, something to be said for maybe tactically thinking or just thinking ahead, I think that's huge, not only in workouts but in everyday life too.
That's something I definitely agree with.
Without getting anxious about it, without wrapping your head around it too much. Because I realize that too when I'm queuing something up for somebody, a movement, and I'll tell them, all right, now you need to be doing this and this and this and this, but don't overthink it. And it's like, wait, what? So there's, you can kind of overshoot on that too, for sure.
Well, it's from that one. It's probably don't dwell on it, and like you say, don't overthink of it. It's just probably taking each process as it comes.
Yeah.
Implement this first step. You got that down. Now incorporate the second one and progress like that. And then obviously, the better you get at the exercise, you should be able to do. Say, for example, you use four types you want to perform during the exercise. Well, obviously, by the time you get to really good at the exercise, that's the minimum expectation you expect.
Right. Yep. There's, like I said, good enough for today, and then there's good. So there's definitely some lines there, and if I can, get somebody to draw a line in the sand just a little bit further at the end of the workout, then their form's gotten that much better at the end of that workout, then heck yeah, that's great.
Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up today for the podcast.
Cool.
Thanks, Trevor, for coming on.
No problem.
And before I forget, I would really appreciate it if you would be so kind as to leave a short written review, as it helps to get the podcast more notoriety, and it would be more visible in future to others, and thus helping more people, which my guests and I are all about. Once again, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time for another episode of the Mindset Game podcast.